I think most of you know that Jim is currently serving as the Assistant to the President for Planning and Assessment at BYU. He's also the Marion B. and Rulon A. Earl Professor of Law at the J. Reuben Clark Law School. He's a faithful faculty member who's made many wonderful contributions to BYU, is a well-loved teacher and a scholar. But he's also accepted many important academic leadership positions. He served on many important university committees, served as Associate Academic Vice President for faculty for 5 years with me, and was the salvation of me on many occasions, I should add. He's also served as Associate Dean and Interim Dean in the law school, and then in his current position related to assessment and university accreditation. Such remarkable and consistent service was recognized when he received an Abraham O. Smoot Citizenship Award from the university. Prior to becoming a BYU professor, Jim received a BA in political science from BYU and a JD from the University of California at Berkeley. He clerked for Judge Monroe G. McKay of the U.S. 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, and then practiced law in Salt Lake City before coming here. Jim has chosen as his title for his remarks today, Faith, Humor, Teaching, and Scholarship. I'm eager to hear from Jim on each of these areas because he's made notable contributions in each area. I've observed his faith as we served together in a BYU student stake, these many years ago. That dates us both, Jim. We worked together, as I said, in the Academic Vice President's office. And I found that Jim was first and foremost a disciple of the Savior, and that his fundamental allegiance is to him. Jim's humor is often self-effacing, but always respectful, at least usually, I think. Sometimes he's not as respectful to himself as I would hope he would be, but it's always fun. His law students appreciate his perspective and the perspective his humor brings to serious matters of the law, and the invitation he makes by way of that humor to not take themselves too seriously. He has received a number of teaching awards attesting to his influence as a teacher, and his scholarship includes thoughtful contributions in the areas of religious freedom, contracts, securities regulation, and legal education. We're delighted to have us all have the opportunity to learn from Jim. He'll speak for 35 or 40 minutes, and then there'll be some time for you to engage him in questions if you'd like to do so. And now I'll invite Alan Parkinson to come up and invite the Lord's Spirit to be with us, and then we'll have the chance to hear from Jim.
I wish to thank Alan for that very generous introduction, and to thank Alan and Jane Birch for organizing this event. I want to express appreciation to each of you for taking time from your busy schedule to be here today. When they asked me to speak, they said, don't try to be funny, don't try to be witty, don't try to be interesting, just be yourself. Now, the last time I spoke, a fight broke out. Apparently somebody was blocking an exit. So the exits are behind you in the corner. Try to make it orderly. Nephi began the Book of Mormon by saying, I, Nephi, was born of goodly parents. And I also was greatly blessed to have wonderful parents who taught me. My mother is here today. My parents were faithful in the church. My father was a high school biology teacher, and my mother was an elementary school teacher and junior high school teacher. They read books. Our house contained many books. And in addition, my parents took us to the public library, which was not very far from our home. My parents talked with us children about ideas. They were knowledgeable about both the gospel and secular ideas. And we children grew up understanding that gospel teachings sometimes differed from the world's perspectives, and that was part of life. Some issues could be resolved based on available information, and some could not. That didn't cause us to reject either religion or science. Also, when I was growing up, I became interested in humor. My father had an active sense of humor, which he used at home, at school, and at church. I read humorous books, a humor magazine, and comics in the newspaper. And my family had some comical and satirical record albums. I was blessed to have many fine teachers in school. Some were good, and some were excellent. My father was one of my best school teachers. My teachers knew their subject matter, and they cared about their students. They dedicated their lives to helping young people. I also had some exemplary teachers and leaders and mentors in the church, and they had a tremendous impact on my friends and me. I should also mention that my sister Allison is here, and her husband Dick Selfridge is a retired faculty member, and we were the beneficiaries of the youth leaders in our ward, who were outstanding. Well, I admired these people, very much. And after high school, I came to BYU. I had many excellent professors. They were role models of people who were knowledgeable in their academic disciplines and faithful in the gospel. And I admired them, and I learned a lot from them. As I grew, I learned about the tremendous influence that teachers can have on people. When I came to BYU, the university was planning to build a law school. And one day I was in my dormitory room, and a feeling came to me that I would like to teach at a law school, especially BYU. And I attended law school with that goal in mind. Now, I knew that if I wanted a teaching position, I was going to have to do really well in law school, and so I was very anxious as I took my final exams. On the day of a final exam, sometimes Nadine would drive me up to the school in our Ford Pinto. You may remember the Ford Pinto. It was just the first in a long line of fine automobiles in our family. There was a photograph of our car in the dictionary next to the definition of breach of warranty. I had a black briefcase that I had purchased at Desert Industries when I was here at BYU for $1. And Nadine would drive me up to the school to take a final exam, and I would hold this black briefcase on my lap, and I would clutch it and squeeze it with my hands on both sides because I was so nervous. And I'm very grateful to Nadine for her strong and consistent support during my legal education and my career. After I graduated, I clerked for a federal appellate judge, and then I practiced law with a firm in Salt Lake City for 3 years. Then I obtained a position as a visiting faculty member at the law school, and that led to a permanent position. I tell my students, my dream has come true, and it's your nightmare. Here at BYU, I've had some outstanding mentors, including Ellen Wilkins, the director of the Faculty Center, who served as academic vice president when I was in the administration, and stake president when I was a bishop, as he mentioned. Before I taught my first law school class, I decided that I wanted to include some humor. So I spent some time developing some jokes. I did that for most of my courses. At the beginning of class, I would give a monologue consisting of a few jokes. Often the jokes were from other people, including professional comedians. Sometimes I wrote original jokes, which was fun for me. The jokes related to lawyers, current events, popular culture, family life, and a range of other topics. Sometimes I would try the jokes out at the dinner table at home the night before. If Nadine didn't think that a joke was funny, it wasn't likely to work in the classroom. The students responded mostly well to the monologues. They came to class on time so they could hear the jokes, even though the jokes weren't on the final exam. I also tried to include humor in the rest of the class discussion. I began keeping files of jokes and began recording humorous observations in my class notes. They included witticisms, half-witticisms, and nit-witticisms. So here are some examples of jokes that I told in monologues. I grew up in a small town. Our town was so small that our Baskin and Robbins only had 2 flavors. One time a mudslide hit my town and caused $3 million in improvements. My parents were overprotective. For example, my tricycle had 7 wheels. And my parents would not let me swing. That was far too dangerous. So they would sit me on the swing and run back and forth past me. They'd say, "It looks similar to this." How many of you are oldest children? Raise your hand. Have you ever noticed how parents are really strict with the oldest children and they become progressively lax with the younger children? I was the oldest child, and I had to do chores 12 hours a day. By the time the youngest child came along, the only family rule was no automatic weapons in the living room. After I grew up, Nadine and I had our own children. We reared 9 children, and sometimes things got a little crazy. One time I went into the boys' room and I didn't know whether to vacuum or to rototill. One summer our house was vandalized, and it was 6 weeks before we discovered it. We had to put up a fence to protect our neighbors from the kids. I was a permissive parent. When a child misbehaved, I would say, "Go to your room at your first convenience. Daddy's going to count to 1,500. And I like to use humor. When I disciplined the children, one day my son touched an electrical outlet. I said, "Oh, you're grounded." Our children played a lot together, but because of my legal training, I didn't let them play cops and robbers. I made them play cops and alleged perpetrators. Raising children is a lot of hard work, as you know, but as somebody once said about Wagner's music, it's not as bad as it sounds. I try to be frugal. For example, it costs $4 to get a shirt dry cleaned, so I don't pay it. When a shirt gets dirty, I donate it to Desert Industries. They wash it, iron it, and put it on a hanger. Next day, I buy it back for $1. I like lawyer jokes. When I graduated from law school, I earned a Juris Doctorate degree. So I asked my professor, "How come we're not called doctor?" And he said, "We're not called doctor because we never make anyone well." People say that's how copper wire was invented. 2 lawyers fighting over a penny. It's been reported that if the number of lawyers in the United States continues to grow at the present rate, by the year 2030, there will be more lawyers than people. Lawyers have a bad reputation, it's true, I know it. You know, it's true that some lawyers are dishonest, arrogant, venal, amoral, ruthless buckets of toxic slime. But I think it's unfair to judge the entire profession by 600,000 or 700,000 bad apples. I recognize that lawyers are criticized in the Scriptures, but I'd like to point out that the Scriptures were translated by non-lawyers. You don't see many criticisms of monks in the Scriptures, do you? Think about it. When I was in law practice, I wasn't a very effective lawyer. I had trouble because legal language is so verbose and redundant. One time I was a witness in court. The clerk asked, "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" I said, "I do, I completely do, and I nothing but do." The judge said, just sit down in the chair. I said, "I'll sit in the chair, the whole chair, and nothing but the chair." I wasn't very good at trial strategy either. One day I was sitting in the courtroom, the jury was there, and I was at counsel table with my client, and he said, "Should I testify or not?" I said, I don't know. He said, "Well, what do you mean you don't know?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "Well, you're the lawyer." And I said, "Well, you're the killer." My closing argument went like this: ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it's better that 1,000 people, it's better that 1,000 guilty people go free than that one innocent person go to jail. My client is guilty, let him go. You know, if I could have articulated that, that might have come out okay. Well, school is stressful for many students, as you know, and students have challenges in their lives in addition to school. And humor can relieve stress. It can remind us to keep a healthy perspective and not to take ourselves too seriously, and to find more enjoyment in life. Appropriate humor can refresh us and lift our spirits and help us to face our challenges. Psychologists say that laughter makes people feel better, both physically and psychologically. Proverbs says, "A merry heart doeth good, like a medicine." Humor can also improve the students' receptivity in the classroom. It encourages them to listen more carefully so that they don't miss out on the fun. They're likely to be more alert if they enjoy what they're doing. And humor can make the subject more interesting. When students are having fun, the class time virtually flies by, and the 50 minutes of class time seem like only 48. Humor can also help us to look at situations in new ways and to challenge conventional wisdom. Humor has long been an effective tool of social and political commentators. Writers such as Jonathan Swift, Mark Twain, H.L. Mencken, and Dave Barry use satire to help us take critical and fresh looks at ourselves and our society. On the other hand, as you know, humor can present unfair and distorted pictures. But most people realize that a humorous observation is not intended to be taken completely at face value. Humor also serves some other analytical functions. It permits people to roam more freely, to be iconoclastic without being threatening, and to make playful observations without resolving all of their feelings on a subject. Humor can also remind us that the contradictions and ironies in a particular situation ultimately might not be resolvable, and that's okay. It's not completely surprising that researchers have found a connection between a well-developed sense of humor and problem solving. Of course, humor can stop us from thinking too. It can be derisive, mocking, or dismissive. It can be used to reinforce our own views by belittling the views of others, and to try to lift ourselves by tearing others down. Humor needs to be used thoughtfully, and we should examine the purposes of our humor and its effects on others. Like many other tools, humor can be used for good and bad purposes. Humor in the classroom should be used gently and responsibly, not in ways that inflict emotional injury on students. Faculty members in a position of power and authority and should not use humor to ridicule a student in the class. As a law student, I was once the object of that kind of humor. My professor in a large class asked me a question. I replied that I didn't know. He asked me again. I again declined to answer. He told me to take a guess. I did. I guessed wrongly. And then he said, "Mr. Gordon, in the words of my old contracts professor, Fritz Kessler, you couldn't be wronger." Okay. I don't remember anybody in the class laughing. I know I didn't laugh. I was pretty embarrassed. But I'm pleased to report that after years of therapy, I've almost completely forgotten this incident that happened on February 5th, 1979 at 11:35 a.m. So we need to treat students respectfully. Also, jokes that are vulgar or that are based on racial or sexual stereotypes are inappropriate. Before using humor, we should consider whether it will offend reasonably sensitive people. Like other aspects of human relations, the boundary between appropriate and inappropriate humor is not always easy to discern. And one person's good-natured humor can be another person's offense. So while using humor in the classroom does present risks, the teacher can help reduce the risks by using self-deprecating humor. You know, if you make fun of yourself, that's pretty much fair game, isn't it? By making it clear that he's only joking, and by being balanced in his humor. For example, if a faculty member makes fun of one political ideology, he should also make fun of other political ideologies. He should be an equal opportunity offender. I'm not suggesting that everyone should include humor in their teaching. It's not everyone's style or interest. But if you enjoy humor, you might consider it. Van Gessel uses humor very effectively in his university assignments. I've also included humor in some of my scholarship. One day I decided to write a law review article that made fun of a particular ancient legal doctrine in the law of contracts. The legal doctrine is called the doctrine of consideration. I pointed out some problems with it, and I included some humorous footnotes. The article was accepted for publication, and so I wrote more articles like that, and they were also published. But not all law reviews had a positive reaction. Once I submitted an article to a law review, and an editor sent me a letter back. He wrote something like, "We have worked long and hard to establish a grim and humorless reputation, and we're not about to let you threaten it." I'd like to talk a little about faith and teaching. I cherish the opportunity to work at Brigham Young University because it provides an environment that's consistent with religious belief. I can talk about my religious convictions and relate them to my discipline. For many religious people, being at a school where they don't have to check their religious identity at the door is liberating. The freedom of students and faculty members, including the freedom of religion and speech, is increased if they can choose to study or work at a religiously affiliated university. Religion's an important part of American life. Over 75% of Americans are affiliated with a religious group. Religiously affiliated institutions of higher education help serve the needs of many Americans and increase the pluralism and diversity among institutions. Michael McConnell has observed that religious universities contribute to the ethical, cultural, and intellectual life of our nation. The aims of a BYU education is something that you're familiar with. It provides that a BYU education should be spiritually strengthening, intellectually enlarging, character building, and leading to lifelong learning and service. So to what degree do BYU faculty members incorporate religious values and perspectives in the instruction? If they do it, how do they do it? Well, we could probably have a discussion about that. There are many approaches. Some professors do not raise religious issues explicitly in the classroom, but their religious views inevitably affect what and how they teach, how they view the world, and the influence they have on their students. Their religious values also affect how they treat their students with kindness, respect, and genuine interest in them and their learning. Moreover, to the extent that they are known to be persons of religious conviction, they provide examples to the students of the proposition that intellectual achievement and rigorous analysis are not incompatible with religious belief, and that they can complement one another. A faithful faculty member teaches her students that the integration of intellect and faith is possible, and she proves it with the example of her own life. She's a role model to the students of a faithful scholar. Other faculty members include religious perspectives from time to time when it seems natural. For example, one law professor of real estate finance essentially taught that although a mortgage holder has the legal right to foreclose on a property upon default, a charitable or a religious person might give the borrower some time to resolve their difficulties. Another law professor taught students that the common law does not require them to disclose defects when they sell a used car. However, the professor then encouraged students to reverse the roles. If you were the buyer, would you want to know? This example reflects the golden rule. Therefore, all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them. In my contracts law class, we learn that courts rarely review the equivalency of the values that the parties receive in a contract. For example, if I agree to sell you my car for $1,000, I can't later go to court and explain that the price was too low. I agreed to it. But to help students remember that there's a higher law than this, I like to quote Brigham Young. He said, there are elders in this church who would take the widow's last cow for $5 and then kneel down and thank God for the fine bargain they had made. In a society that increasingly defines its relationships in terms of legal standards, it's beneficial, I think, to point out that legal duties and moral responsibilities do not always coincide. Depending on the subject matter, explicit references to religious perspectives in the classroom might appear only intermittently when they seem appropriate. President James E. Faust advised our law students, do not expect your professor to concentrate his lessons out of the scriptures, although occasionally he may wish to do so. His obligation is to teach you the secular rules of civil and criminal law and matters that relate to them, such as procedures. Your obligation is to learn the rules of law and related matters. The whisperings of the Holy Spirit will no doubt help you, but you must learn the rules of law, using Churchill's phrase, by blood, sweat, and tears. Just having a good heart does not get the job done. A religiously affiliated law school can use its religious affiliation in the teaching of professional values, including honesty, integrity, and service. Brigham Young taught our education should be such as to improve our minds and fit us for increased usefulness, to make us of greater service to the human family. To help teach professional values at the law school, we have a course called Professional Seminar. Professional Seminar integrates religious and moral values into a model of legal professionalism. And it discusses legal education, the legal system, law practice, and the role of lawyers in society. The readings for the course vary depending on the individual instructor. In my section, we address, among other topics, the law school experience, including the Socratic method, uncertainty, ambiguity, and some of the values that permeate legal education. We discuss how to deal with feelings of competition and stress in law school and how to try to keep things in perspective. We also address the concept of professionalism and the characteristics of a profession. We read an article by Elder Dallin H. Oakes that discusses the book, The Bridge Over the River Kwai. How many of you are familiar with the book or the movie, The Bridge Over the River Kwai? In the book, you'll remember, Colonel Nicholson was a prisoner of war in Southeast Asia during World War II. His captors had him design and build a railway bridge over the River Kwai. This was a very challenging task, but he succeeded. And he was very proud of it. Then British commandos arrived to destroy the bridge. So what's he going to do? What he did is he alerted the guards to stop the destruction of the bridge. He became so focused on his own professional work that he forgot the big picture. His goal was to help win the war, not to accomplish an engineering feat. The book illustrates how sometimes professionals can become so focused on their technical work that they forget the larger picture. In Professional Seminar, we also discuss the importance of honesty in the practice of law. We also address the concept of civility, which is receiving increased attention in the legal profession. And we conclude the course with a discussion about priorities and balance in our lives. The class addresses one of the most challenging questions that some law students will encounter. How can I perform and even excel in my profession and at the same time be true to my moral and religious beliefs? In the course, we consider some ancient wisdom. For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man gain? What shall a man give in exchange for his soul? The students write a paper at the end of the course, and in it they indicate that they value the effort to integrate religious principles and professional values. And at BYU, I also have the opportunity to incorporate faith and intellect in my scholarship, to combine them, faith and intellect in my scholarship. And I feel that I've been blessed with ideas. You may have had similar experiences. I've prayed as I've worked on my scholarship, and I believe I've received assistance as I've thought about issues, done research, wrote articles, and placed articles for publication. I remember one time when I was thinking about a really challenging legal issue in the field of federal securities law. Different U.S. courts of appeals have conflicting views on the subject. One night, I said my nightly prayer, and I climbed into bed, and I started thinking about the issue. And as I did that, a distinct thought came into my mind, and it was a potential solution to the problem. I published some articles related to that idea. Now, that's not to suggest that my scholarly views represent gospel truths, but hopefully they have contributed to the scholarly literature, and I certainly feel that I've been blessed beyond my own abilities. Another way in which I try to combine faith and scholarship relates to a topic that I've chosen to write about. A number of years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court issued an important decision about the free exercise of religion. I only knew a little about the free exercise of religion, but the decision troubled me. I decided to write an article critiquing the decision. This required some research because the topic wasn't in my area of expertise, and I had a lot to learn. Some of my colleagues graciously gave me comments on my draft. My article used satire to analyze the Supreme Court's decision. Of all my publications, this article has been cited the most. I later wrote additional articles about the free exercise of religion, and this background has helped me in my administrative work. So those are some ideas about including faith and humor in teaching and scholarship. I believe that the gospel can help us in our academic work. First, the gospel is true. If gospel principles guide us, our teaching and scholarship are more likely to be of high quality and consistent with true principles. Second, the Holy Ghost can help us to succeed beyond our natural abilities. We can receive divine assistance to help us do better than we could do on our own. I would like to conclude by expressing thanks for the wonderful blessing of working at Brigham Young University. I would also like to express thanks for all that you do to make the university a great religious institution of higher education. Thank you very much. Okay, so I think we're supposed to open it up for questions now. And when you ask questions, this is your opportunity to watch my confidence fade as I begin to stammer and stumble around as you probe beneath these superficial things that I've said and discover that there's not a lot of depth there, okay? All right, so over here, go ahead. Yes?
It's being recorded, so try to speak up.
Okay.
Just repeat the question.
Okay, very good. I try to repeat the question. Go ahead, yes.
If you could talk a little bit about your administrative roles and how maybe the gospel has helped in those roles, perhaps?
Yes, thank you. Could I talk a little bit about my administrative roles and how the gospel helps in that? Yes. Okay, so I've had a number of administrative roles because the main goal is to get me out of the classroom. Currently I'm assistant to the president for planning and assessment. There are many challenging issues that any university faces, and we face them. We try to follow gospel principles. We try to counsel together. We try to get input from additional people across campus. I certainly pray I'm very much aware that I have limitations and that my perspective is very limited. And sometimes when I say things, it sounds like a good idea at the time, but later on reflection, I realize that it was quite short-sighted. So I need to try to be humble and to try to be open to the promptings of the Spirit and not just be trying to stake out my own position or trying to show off. We also, when I worked with Alan in the Academic Vice President's office, we faced some significant challenges. I now work in an office that has a memory for me, and the memory is that when I worked with Alan, I had 14 media interviews in one day in that office. So there were some issues that were challenging at that time, and I felt helped and blessed and strengthened beyond my own ability. Another thing that I'd like to share is that sometimes there have been challenges that seem serious, and you wonder how they're going to turn out. And they could go either very well, or they could go very poorly, or they could go somewhere in the middle. And I am frankly amazed at how often they go very well. And it's strengthened my testimony. We are really blessed in many ways. It doesn't mean we'll be spared from adversity or problems, but I am, wouldn't you say, Alan? I'm amazed, I'm astonished at how blessed we are when some challenges arise. Okay, over here, yes.
There's a case before the U.S. Supreme Court on public accommodations. I'm sure you're aware of it.
Yes.
Let us suppose that the worst happens from our perspective, and that is they deny the right of anybody to discriminate. How do you think we could respond if that were the climate? Any thoughts?
Right. So so the issue is there's a case pending before the U.S. Supreme Court on public accommodations, and if the decision gets made in a particular way, how can we respond to that kind of thing, right? So this is an issue that is an important one for our society and also for the university. We don't discriminate based on people's status, okay? But we do regulate conduct. We regulate everybody's conduct, right? And some people think that's just fine. You know, we understand you have religious principles and religious doctrines, and this is consistent with that. As long as you don't discriminate against people on the basis of their status, you are entitled to regulate their conduct, right? But there are other people who disagree with that. And they say, no, that's none of your business to regulate people's conduct. And if you regulate their conduct, you are denying some element of their identity, and you're not allowed to do that, okay? The issue is a real one. Of course, we're not alone among religious institutions or higher education institutions that have rules that are based on religious beliefs, you know. And so I think we will be challenged, we will be pushed on those issues. I'm fairly optimistic that they're going to turn out okay. I think it's likely that people will recognize that there's a balancing of rights. When rights conflict, there's a balancing, there's compromise that needs to be made. And it needs to be done thoughtfully and sensitively, and we need to be kind and supportive of people. But we also have certain values that are just very important to us. They're core values. And I think there'll be room for us to continue to adhere to those values. Okay, right behind you, yes.
So, where have you found time to produce excellent, good thinking and writing and good scholarship and still be a good dad and a good husband?
Right. I don't think I'm going to call my wife as a witness and put her under oath right now, just in case you were wondering. So, this is a challenge, right? We have family obligations, we have church obligations, and we have professional obligations, and we think about putting things in that order, don't we? Our family, we have to take care of our family, our church callings, and then our professional obligations, and it's very easy to get those reversed because work has deadlines, right? And we need to perform in our job, or things could go badly for us. We can put off our children or our spouse, and things will not go badly immediately. They may go badly later, but we can kick that can down the road. By the way, I should have repeated your question. How do we find time, to be a good father, a good mother, and then meet your professional obligations? We as faculty members, we have time given to us to do teaching and scholarship, and it's a balance, right? You want to give appropriate attention to teaching and appropriate attention to scholarship and also to citizenship. But there are better and worse ways of using time. There are very efficient ways to use time, and a lot, sometimes not so much. We don't do so much. I think we're blessed when we try to be prayerful, and when we try to use our time well, and we try to be efficient, and we don't waste time. The most productive time that I had as a scholar was when I was a campus bishop. I produced more articles in that time than any other time in my life by far, and I had the least time. And, there's only one way to explain that, okay? So I think the Lord will make up for our shortcomings if we try to keep our priorities straight. Not that we're perfect. Okay? Okay, other questions people have? Matt?
You've had some administrative assignments where you've had to make some hard decisions, about sensitive issues, hard issues. In those kinds of situations, how do you balance justice, mercy, these conflicting kinds of imperatives?
So when one makes difficult administrative decisions, how do you balance things like justice and mercy? And the gospel has some values in it, like justice and mercy, that seem to be in tension one with another, right? Faith and works is another one, okay? Do you just trust in the Lord, or you try to do it all yourself? That's another one. How much, So it's sometimes it's a balance of those things. Sometimes it's an integration of those things. And I have to confess that it is hard, okay? If you have a faculty member who has done things, for example, that are inappropriate for a faculty member, do you exercise mercy? That's a good thing. That's what I would want exercised if I were that faculty member. I certainly have made mistakes. I've said really dumb things in the classroom, okay? And they're on tape, too. You hope people will treat you with mercy. On the other hand, the university has a mission, and at some point, some behavior is not consistent with that mission and actually undermines it. And so you try to make sure. There are people in this room with whom I've worked on these kinds of issues, right? Really, really sound issues, administrators that I've worked with regarding faculty members. And the first thing you try to do, I think, is try to be clear up front what the standards are. Here's where the lines are, okay? Now, you can't always be exact. Look, these are the basic boundaries, okay? And if you think you want to bump up against those boundaries, we got to have a conversation about it and make sure you're comfortable and I'm comfortable. And there are ways to do it, and then there are ways that are not as productive, right? For example, you can analyze and discuss fundamental church legal doctrine, but you're not supposed to contradict or oppose it publicly or with students, okay? So let's talk about it. So first you try to be very clear about what the rules are up front. Secondly, if a faculty member begins to get into trouble, you try to put the faculty member on individual notice. You may not have realized that this is an issue, this is a challenge, this is a problem, and maybe you didn't intend it to be interpreted this way, but that's a reasonable way that people can interpret it, and some people are interpreting it that way, and what do you think about that, And so you try to have a conversation with them and give them more than one opportunity to self-correct, right? At some point, you have to decide, this really isn't a very good fit, okay? It's not working for you and it's not working for us. It becomes especially hard when you're granting continuing faculty status, because basically you're giving somebody a lifetime contract, And so you have to make hard decisions. I should say also that there's a tendency for me sometimes to weigh the institutional interest heavily, a little more heavily than the individual interest, because the institutional interest reflects individuals also. You've got this faculty member in front of you who's worthy of respect and love, but the faculty member is doing things that are frankly damaging to students' testimonies, and those students are individuals too. And there are going to be a lot of them in this faculty member's classroom over the years. So you have to think about that also. And it is not easy. It's easy to, I think, just sort of side with the institution or side with the individual instinctively, okay? And different people do that based on their value systems and their personalities, and that's okay to have those different views. But both values are important, and you have to work it out in the individual case. I think that's probably enough time. Maybe we'll do one more question, Dixon. Okay, go ahead.
You've been inspirational to me. I really appreciate all you've done. You teach with humor. I use limericks to teach with. You've inspired a limerick that I'd like to honor you with. Our colleague, the professor Jim Gordon, when teaching himself, often tore down. His lectures ended sooner with scholarship and humor. His students never knew any boredom.
Very good. Thank you so much. That's great. See, and he came to this and he got a publication out of it. So, thank you very much.